To me, the final straw, the final one, the chiefest, he even calls himself at one point, the chiefest of sinners is Saul the terrorist, who goes door to door with papers from the Jewish leadership, allowing him to drag out into the street anyone who refuses to deny the name of Christ, these members of this new religion called the Way. We now call it Christianity. But he can drag them out in the street and stone them to death legally. And he's doing it house to house, town to town, until he's on the road to Damascus. And he sees Jesus in a vision. And he has his Damascus Road experience, and he is saved. He is so saved. That's an odd way to say it, but he's such a new creation. He doesn't call himself Saul anymore. He changes his name and calls himself Paul. He wants no identity at all with who he used to be. He now wants to be identified as the man who's there to send grace, to take a message. And so on his deathbed, the last 2 books he pens from a Roman prison cell. They'll eventually take him out into the courtyard and chop his head off. Before they do that, he writes 2 letters to his young protege, Timothy, a guy that he won to Christ, that he put in a church and made pastor. And he says this in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15. This is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptance. I love this phrase, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. At the tail end of this message, the only way I can see that as I read that is Christ came down the ladder to save sinners. Sinners who were ex-cons, sinners who were minor terrorists, sinners who were choir boys. How many of you realize that we were all there? Everybody here has X something. To save sinners of whom I am chief. However, for this reason, I obtained mercy, that in me first Jesus Christ might show all long-suffering, patience, mercy, as a pattern to those who are going to believe on him for everlasting life. Paul saw himself as an example of how great the patience, the mercy, and the grace of God could be. Because Paul is basically saying, look, I was the worst of the worst, and if he can save me, he can save anyone, and I am an example of how powerful the long-suffering of God is. And he came down into the earth to save sinners, of which I was the chiefest, of which I was the example. You see, Christ didn't just surround himself with what would make for a great board. Christ didn't worry about building a church through men. Christ has never worried about building a church through man. One of the things I got hung up on as pastor was building my church. Consumed me at one point, building my church. I don't know if you realize it or not, but that is the stepping stone, the stumbling block to absolute burnout and give up. Jesus never told pastors to build churches. He said, on this rock, I'll build my church. You just feed my sheep. Took me a long, long time to learn feeding was my job, not building. But Christ didn't need to get this group of men to build. Why does he even have disciples? And why didn't he do a better job picking them? He wanted friends. He wasn't picky about his friends. He just wanted people he could be open with, he could be honest with, who would be open and honest with them. And it just so happens that some of them were murderers and some of them were church boys. And some of them were terrorists like Saul, who would say yes to Jesus. And the moment that any of us say yes to Jesus, it's not just in that moment we become friends, but it's in that moment we have a mentality of friends. Before that, we have a mentality of servants. I've met a lot of people. We go to a lot of churches. I preach in a lot of pool houses, a lot of living rooms, a lot of backyards, a lot of hotel conference rooms, and every now and then a church. Because grace isn't popular. You're blessed right here. And a lot of those messages, a lot of the people, what I'm looking into people's eyes and seeing are people who still see him as master and themselves as servant, and very few people who see him as their friend. And the saddest commentary on the modern church is that we have raised up churches full of good servants who have no concept of relationship. They work hard, they're on every committee, they sign up for everything, they're 5-star church people. But they do not see God as their friend because they don't feel worthy to have such a friend in Jesus. When I was a kid, a long, long time ago in the church, we used to sing a song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. That's too old school now. We wouldn't, probably most places don't do that one, but I remember growing up loving it because it taught me friendship with Jesus and the right to call him friend. If he calls me friend, I have the right to call him friend. Listen, this isn't something that you jump through 10 hoops to get to. Every one of us in this place today that have accepted the grace of God can call ourselves his friend. Say, Pastor, I don't feel like his friend. That's okay. Jesus did not come so that you would be connected to your Christianity through your emotions. He did not come so that you would know you have a relationship because you feel like you have a relationship. He came to be a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Came to be a friend that loves you when no one else loves you. When everyone else has rejected you, he accepts you. And Christ doesn't care so much about your testimony. We like to think he goes to the guttermost, and pulls them out. But the reality is, anybody whose heart is open, whether they're on the platform or the pew, whether they're graced to be a leader or they're in the gutter, that we receive him as friend.